All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Blend Blazers podcast with your host, Ricardo D. Rice. And I have another great treat for you today. Okay, so y'all know how I typically sit around and be thinking about stuff that just randomly crosses my mind. And I was like, this month is Black History Month. And, we want to recount all our great ancestors and present people who are doing great things. But I was like, I want to go a different route and talk about something we don't really talk about. So I thought about it, and this gentleman reached out about a year ago. And at that time, I wasn't doing virtual, and he immediately popped up into my timeline. And I was like, this is absolutely perfect. So today, we are going to have a conversation about African history, what it is, how it correlates to us. Because, many of us go, I was born in America. I don't know anything about Africa. I'm not descendant of Africa. I don't understand nothing about that. But in the same breath, we'll say we're kings and queens and pharaohs and things. So today you're actually going to understand if any of that is true. And if so, how does it correlate to you? So I am so excited to be introducing Mr. Emmanuel Kulu. How are you doing today, sir?
Greetings, my brother. I'm glad to be here. I'm doing well.
All right, disclaimer. He's trying to upstage me, as y'all can tell from his background. So that's a disclaimer. He's trying to upstage me, but I do what I can when I can. So it's all good. All right, sir.
We are reporting live from IBP Media Studios in Buffalo, New York.
See, he just had to add that in. He just had to add that in. It's fine. I'll take it. It's fine. But what you're gifting me today, the knowledge you're gifting me, I'll take it. I don't have to love it, but I'll take
it. Absolutely.
All right, sir. So introduce yourself to the people, who you are, what you do, all that good stuff.
My name is Emmanuel Kulu Jr. I am an African historian and an author of I, Black Pharaoh, Rise to Power, and I, Black Pharaoh, Golden Age of Triumph. I am also a descendant of the Zulu tribe, the Bantu people, the Bantu speakers, and I'm here to enlighten everyone on their beautiful African history, which has been taken from us due to transatlantic slave trade and oppression and suppression.
All right, so let's start from the beginning. So just start from the beginning. Wherever you normally start, I don't even know where to pull from. So I'm gonna let you start from the beginning.
Okay, from what aspect you want me to start from? From how do we get connected or disconnected to African history?
Well, let's start about Africa first. Like, what was Africa like? And then we can move into how we end up getting brought here and things of that matter. So let's start with Africa.
Yeah, so back home in Africa, Africa is, number one, it's a continent. And I think a lot of times, because we've been so miseducated, we see it as just one landmass or one country. But it's a continent of many different countries. So you have many different cultures, thousands and thousands of different tribes. I usually start with ancient Egypt when it comes to most of my seminars and conferences on educating us about our great history. Because when we look up history, the only part of Africa that we might see in our history books is ancient Egypt. This is why I particularly started there with most of my seminars. And a lot of times online, people always ask me, why is ancient Egypt so important? Well, what we've been told here in America and abroad, the UK, even back home in Africa, is that we are responsible, or people who look like us are responsible for nothing great that happened throughout world history. So you can't say that once we can prove that the ancient Egyptians were African, which all you have to do is go to Egypt, Cairo, Aben Simbel, or you can also go to Aswan, Luxor, those places in Egypt, and you can see that these were Black African people. And we can also talk about the connections between Egypt and Mesoamerica. So we know that the Egyptians traveled the seas. They were considered to be great seamen, as you have Mesoamerican pyramids in South America. So there is a lot of many connections between the Americas and Egypt, even from the BC times. So we know that is facts. We know about certain plants, the bottle gourds, the squash. We know about some of the dimensions of the Mesoamerican pyramids are exactly as the pyramids in ancient Egypt. So we know that there was contact between Africa and America far before Columbus.
All right, so when we think Africa, should we be thinking kings, queens, pharaohs, and things of that magnitude? Is that accurate? Should we be thinking like that? We're talking about
I think we need to think about kings, queens, scientists, mathematicians, farmers, skilled traders, architects, you know, technology, you know, people who made technology, all of these different things, doctors. We need to think about all of that. We don't just need to think about just the king and queen, because these were people. I mean, look at the pyramids. They have never been duplicated. You know, so clearly these peoples were master architects, masters of science, masters of mathematics. These things we know. So we don't have to just limit it to kings and queens, because we accomplish many things besides that.
So they had their own, pretty much their own ecosystem. Like they were a fully functioning, place.
Yes. Egypt actually is where the Greeks got the pi system from. Okay. So when we see these systems, the Fibonacci sequence, the pi system in mathematics, we think, well, this didn't come from Africa, but it actually did. Even the measurement of the meter came from ancient Egypt. So this is why Egypt is so important to Black history, to make that connection. Because if you separate Egypt, which was the first mega civilization, you have Egypt, then you went into Babylon, Assyria, Greece, Rome, and then today we have what they call the Anglo-American power. So Egypt was the first mega civilization. So if we can prove and show that Egypt was an African civilization, and we know that we come from Africa, somehow, some way, that is a part of our lineage.
So how much is actually like documented, like names of mathematicians, statisticians? Is any of this actually documented that people can actually see or find?
Yeah, actually, Imhotep was considered to be the first, what they call genius or master architect. He built the step pyramid of Dozier. And then a guy named Hippocrates or Hippocrates, whatever you want to call him, claimed to be the father of medicine after this doctor named Imhotep, who was in ancient Egypt. And it mentions that Hippocrates went to Egypt to study medicine and architecture from the school of Imhotep. So he had to come to Egypt, that is documented, to study how these Egyptians practice medicine. So the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, they always gave reverence to Egypt. Even when you turn around your dollar bill, you see a Great Pyramid there. You see the Great Pyramid. And you see the Eye of Horus there as well on top of the pyramid. So it's clear that Egypt was always connected with civilization that followed thereafter.
Okay, so now let's paint the picture. Let's start moving this along. So they're in Egypt doing their thing, and then people show up and folks get taken. How does that, what does that story sound like or look like?
Well, see, this didn't just happen in Egypt. When the Sahara started to dry up, Egyptians dispersed, not just Egypt, okay, but Egypt and also what they called Ethiopia or Sudan today. These were the first mega civilizations at that time, where science, mathematics, all this stuff was mastered. When the Sahara started to dry up, and also colonization, conquest, these people started to disperse throughout the continent. Not saying that there wasn't other tribes throughout Africa at the time, because there were, but most of them, Central and West and Eastern Africa at that time in the BC era, were mostly stateless. So they had tribes and neighboring tribes that they dealt with, but they weren't like organized or mega civilization at that time. You started to see African civilizations develop after the fall of Egypt, pretty much. And it's probably because these ancient Egyptians dispersed, these ancient Ethiopians dispersed, these ancient people of the land of Punt dispersed throughout Africa and abroad.
So did they go out and kind of replicate what they knew from Egypt and created their own ecosystems and all these different spaces?
That's what we believe. We believe that a great scholar named Sheikh Anta Diop has mentioned the different kinds of pyramids that are very similar to those in ancient Egypt throughout Africa. So we know that there's some sort of connection there. The number system, some very similar architecture in ancient Mali as well, which is in West Africa. So we're noticing connections between these different African civilizations after the fall of ancient Egypt.
Okay, so they go out, they start their own spaces, and then I was gonna say the wrong thing. I'm not gonna say that. And then colonizers show up and kidnap them? Is that the story?
Well, when you say that's over in the AD, we're talking about now we're going from BC all the way to AD, right? So now when we get down to AD, we even in the AD times, the 13th century, the richest man in the 13th and 14th century was Mansa Musa. And he was in Western Mali, the king of Western Mali. His predecessor, named Abu Bakr II, he traveled to a great land of the west of Mali. That means he has to cross that ocean. And we believe that he came to America before Columbus. And this is before transatlantic slave trade. They have in Mexico what they call the Omlec Heads. And these heads, these colossal heads, they have the structure of Negroid or African faces. So it is Ivan Van Sertima's beliefs that these ancient African people came to America before Columbus did, settled there, and became kings and rulers over the native people at that time. Time went on, and these people again dispersed throughout the Americas. There is Balboa, who was a mercenary of, I believe, Portugal, who mentioned that he saw Ethiopians in the Americas. Ethiopians would be black-faced people. That's what the term Ethiopian means. He saw them in America in the late 1500s. Columbus, in his second voyage to America, mentioned that the Native Americans told him that they were trading with black-skinned people from the South and Southeast with gold-tipped spears. He took the spears and he had them assayed and found out that they were the exact same spears as those in Western Mali. So we know that Abu Bakr had traveled and came to what we call the Americas because he took the same spears and said that they came from Mali. So there was a connection there. Then after this time period, Europe was going through such a dark age. They were going through the Black Death. They were going through the Little Ice Age, the coldest time in Europe it had ever been. They were fighting the 100-Year War in 13 and the 1500s between the French and the British. And they feared that they'd be wiped out. Over 60 million Europeans died in the Black Death. So mercenaries started to be sent out to different parts of Africa and different parts of India to pillage these lands of the resources that they had. And also to, instill colonization because Europe was suffering at that time. So this is why we see what happened with the capturing of slaves, some slaves being sold. There's always been slavery throughout the history of the world. So slavery is not a new thing. I think sometimes here in America, we think it's a new thing. What happened in America probably is the most brutal version of slavery we've ever seen. I'm not even going to say probably. It was the most brutal slavery we've ever seen. But due to lack of resources, they had to leave Europe and go to places like Africa, what we call today the Americas, and India, looking for gold and looking for other resources for survival.
Okay, so did we ever find out what happened to the individuals that were already here previously to when these new people were brought here?
There were countless wars. A lot of them died from disease. A lot of them mixed with Native American tribes and still alive. I mean, there's references of the Gullah Geechee tribes in Florida, which tried to fight slavery, and they remained a free state for a very, very long time. But a lot of them were killed off. And some were just grouped in with the other African slaves over time. And it's really deep. And I think sometimes we get it mixed up with, there's a new theory out now that we're not African, that we are Aboriginal Americans, which, we got to be careful of because we don't have significant proof of that. But we do have proof that Africans traveled to America before Columbus. We do have proof that even in like I said, the Mesoamerican pyramids are exactly identical to those in Egypt. How could that be if there was no sort of connection there? there is absolutely some Egyptian artifacts that have been found, possibly in the Grand Canyon. So it's a lot of things that we're finding out, and we're like, how could Africans, we were told that Africans didn't have boats and couldn't sail and couldn't cross the ocean. But now we're discovering and we're uncovering the lies that have been told that we were a primitive people all over the continent. And we're finding that's just not true.
So what are some of the other, because I know you encounter this all the time, because you do lectures all the time. What are some of the other rumors that you can dispel while we're talking about this? Or some of the questions you get asked that it's just, I don't want to say ignorance, but almost ignorance, because we really just don't know.
Right. Well, some of the miseducation that has been told is that no one who looks like you and I have ever done anything great, number one. Number two is that we were primitive, only known for living in mud huts, had lions and tigers and bears in our backyards, and tigers aren't even in Africa, just so people who don't know. That's India. But anyway, that's the idea. We're all running around naked, had no civilization, knew nothing until European colonization. This is some of the miseducation and how they paint us. When you go to Africa, now watch this. This is how this goes. When you go to Africa, there's a very negative image of African Americans on the media. It's street gangsters, thugs, players, basketball players, football players. Literally. That's the image. Pimps, prostitutes. This is the image that Africans are being fed to their eyes about Black Americans. Then when we come to this side of the world, what are we being fed about Africa? What I just mentioned, the mud huts, naked women running around, poverty, Ebola, AIDS, all of these things. No civilization, jungle. This is what we're being fed here. And then we find that nobody wants to cross over to the other side. And this causes that diaspora divide that we have going on today, where Africans are told when they do come to America, don't get involved with Black Americans. Africans say, we don't want to go to Africa. Africa poor. Africa got all these diseases. And the media has played a real strong part in that diaspora divide. In the 1960s, it was the number one thing for guys like Dr. King, Malcolm X, not to connect with guys like Patrice Lumumba, Kwame Nkrumah, Nelson Mandela. It was the number one thing that they could not allow to happen, is for African Americans to connect with Africa. Because African Americans particularly have a measure of freedom that we can speak out about certain issues that they probably don't have in Africa, because, people just disappear in these third world countries. They can just disappear just like that. You causing a problem, you wake up, you're surrounded by soldiers, and that's it. So the pivotal part of being in America is having that freedom of speech to be able to speak against matters that aren't right. Things that I'm still doing to this day, speaking about the African origins of civilizations, period.
Okay. What are some tidbits that are in your books that people should know?
I, Black Pharaoh, Rise to Power is the true restoration of the African origins of ancient Egypt. The tidbits is you're going to get an adventurous story. This is a historical fiction for those who want to know. This is not a nonfiction book, but I took from historical figures. You're going to learn about the great Queen Habshetsu, who was an African woman who ruled the known world for 20 to 25 years. This is before any women liberation movements. I think this is very important to know. We always hear about Cleopatra when it comes to Egypt, and that's because Cleopatra had Greek origins. Her father was a Ptolemy. Her mother was African, but they still can prove that she was Greek, so to speak. So that's why we always see Cleopatra on the forefront of Egypt. But actually, Cleopatra didn't do close to what Habshetsu did. Habshetsu was a sole ruler, created a 25-year reign of peace in Egypt, made all these great trade connections, created monumental constructions in Egypt. And after her death, they tried to destroy all that she built because she was a woman. So I thought that was very interesting. And it's about this great king warrior who's very similar to my great ancestor Shaka Zulu. His name was Tutmosis III. He was the greatest Egyptian conquering pharaoh. Between him and Ramses II, these two pharaohs conquered most into the north, as far north as the Black Sea and as far south as modern day Sudan today. So these people, and even actually the Pharaoh Khufu they have found some remnants of stone tablets with his name on it in Australia. So this is also to show you that these Egyptians didn't just stay in Egypt.
They
traveled. So, and we talked about the Mesoamerican connection as well, the plants. I believe that same Pharaoh Ramses, I believe they found cocaine in his hair follicles. Now, cocaine is indigenous to South America, right?
Mm.
So if cocaine is indigenous to South America, how did he get cocaine in the coca plant in his hair follicles?
Yeah.
So I think sometimes we think in this society that we did things that people never did, and it's just not true. As the Bible says, there is nothing new under the sun. Mm-hmm. So these people traveled the world far before Columbus was even thought of.
Any other figures that we should speak about, major figures from African history, outside the ones that you just named? Any others that people, because I want people to take away some names so they can actually look up or buy your book to find out more about any other big name people that people should know about?
People love Moses. People love Moses. Moses is in my book as well. Historical figures that scholars that have really influenced me. Sheikh Anta Diop, an African Senegalese scholar. Malcolm X influenced me. He mentioned in his trip to Egypt how he came back and saw these Black African people and said the Black man can look right at himself and still not know that he's looking at himself. And what he was talking about is you can look at that Sphinx, the face, the structure of the Sphinx, and say, and not know that this is a Black man because what you've been told about your own people. This is what he was saying in 1963. All other guys like Dr. Ben, Dr. Henry Clark, Ivan Van Sertima, who wrote the book They Came Before Columbus, which happened to be one of my favorite because it shows the African development in ancient America far before Columbus. So Runoko Rashidi, Dr. Ilyasa Shabazz, Malcolm X's daughter, Betty Shabazz. A lot of these scholars and activists were very instrumental in me creating I Black Pharaoh to restore the true African pride, to restore the truth, more importantly than pride, but to restore the fact that African people were responsible for creating civilization as we know it today.
Okay. This was very enlightening because like I said, we don't hear a lot of this stuff. Nobody really has any factual data to really accompany when we do say it, to accompany it. So it was good to put some context to these thoughts and this stuff.
And Ricardo, it's one of those things where history belongs to the victors, right? And a lot of times, if someone is going to conquer your nation, your tribe, or even buy your business, more than likely, they have to put a new spin on it. They're probably going to change the name. They're probably going to change the terminology. Even the name Egypt is not what these ancient African people called it, that land. They called it Kemet. And what Kemet means is land of the Blacks. So you see, these are things that we are not taught in school for a reason, because we have to be, according to the system, we had to be kept in a certain position, in a certain level of understanding of things. Because if we made that connection back to Africa, which a lot of people are waking up now, as I'm taking these trips and doing virtual tours, I'm seeing more of our people in these tours. But before, you couldn't find us in no Egyptian museum. You couldn't find us and traveling to Ghana or traveling to Zimbabwe to see the skyscrapers, or to go to Nigeria, which is a beautiful city, Cameroon, all of these different places, Tanzania, to see the beautiful scenery, to see our culture, the tribes. And we most of the time when you go to these places, you're seeing groups of everyone but African or African American people. And it's sad. It's possibly because of the means, but it's also possible because we don't have the interest in Africa because what we've been told.
This is true. This is very, very true. All right. Any final thoughts that you want to leave with the people that are watching or listening?
I want to leave with what Marcus Garvey once said. Marcus Garvey says, a person without knowledge of his history, he said, a person without knowledge of his history can be told anything. And can be told anything. So we have to have knowledge of our history. We have to know who we were to know where we're going. It's something like this professor, his name is Robin Walker. He mentioned a study on African Americans, and he says we have high group esteem, but high self-esteem, but low group esteem. Group esteem is how you feel about your culture, religion, and your race. Now compare that to like someone from a Chinese person. They might not have the self-esteem that we have, but their group esteem is up here. So when you have group esteem that's up there, you're always looking up at what you can be. This is why it's so important that we know our history so we can increase our group esteem, how we feel about ourselves.
Which is absolutely vital, especially now. So how do people get in touch with you?
You can get in touch with me on iblackpharaoh.com. There's a contact section. You can also catch me on LinkedIn. I'm mostly active on LinkedIn. You can also Emmanuel Kulu on LinkedIn or Facebook, Emmanuel Kulu. Also, you can catch me on IAM_Kulu on Twitter or Instagram. That's IAM_Kulu on Instagram and Twitter. My book, I, Black Pharaoh, Rise to Power, is on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, Pennant Publications. Shout out to Pennant for publishing this book when nobody wanted to. And yeah, that's all my contacts. You can find me there.
All right. So special thanks to our very special guest today, Mr. Emmanuel Kulu. I know I have been enlightened. I know my friends are going to call me once they hear and be like, I didn't know any of that. And we probably have a whole conversation about it and probably end up buying your book, or both of them, and really having like a book group about it. Because like you said, this group esteem thing right now amongst us African Americans is concerning. Yeah. So we definitely need to get that up. So again, special thanks to you. And I will see the rest of you guys the next time we do another episode of Blend Blazers Podcast with your host, Ricardo D. Rice.